In the words of the late great Mamprenda Fasi, umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. Hello and welcome to it. This is #Africa Mduduzile Ramela. We start with this. Uganda's Supreme Court has begun hearing a petition to challenge a constitutional court decision removing an age limit cap of 75 for presidential candidates. The bill was signed into law in December 2017. Now, critics argue the law will allow 74-year-old President Yoweri Museveni to seek re-election for a sixth term in 2021. Gabon President Ali Bongo Ondimba is back in the country a week after an attempted military coup. He's been recuperating abroad for more than 2 months now after suffering a stroke in October. During his absence, soldiers called on the public to rise up. The military officials involved have since been arrested. The world's leading producer of diamonds plans to launch operations in Zimbabwe. Russia's Alrosa announced the move after talks in Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin this week hosted his Zimbabwean counterpart, Emmerson Mnangagwa. The Zimbabwean president is on a 5-nation European tour. And get this, archaeologists in Egypt have uncovered 2 ancient tombs in the Western Desert dating back to the Roman period. The Antiquities Ministry says the tombs were built with mud bricks and have different architectural styles. Ancient human remains, pottery, fragments and colorful funeral paintings on the walls of both tombs were also uncovered. Now, the South African government has been urged to intervene in the current unrest in Zimbabwe. Violence flared up earlier this week after the fuel price was more than doubled last weekend. Internet services have been restored following a 24-hour shutdown. The move comes as President Emmerson Mnangagwa looks to prevent demonstrators from mobilizing. The protest is led by the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions. To discuss the situation in the country, I'm joined by Africa Diaspora Forum chairperson Vusmuzi Sibanda. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on the show. So we're seeing scenes that we really haven't seen in Zimbabwe before. And some people say, well, Africa rising, but does Africa have to burn as it rises?
Thank you very much. I think the question that you just asking, that does it really have to burn as it rises? I'm wondering if it does burn in any case, if it will ever rise, because I think the biggest question that we need to ask ourselves is that, is Africa real rising? I think we've got some honest, hard-hitting questions that we've got to ask ourselves. The rhetoric that we have had, for so many years that, the West is responsible for the chaos and the problems in Africa. I think we need to rewrite that script properly maybe and get to sit down and be genuine with ourselves and say, are we not pointing fingers at other people when the problem is real with us?
And that's just it, right? To which extent do we blame external forces for what is happening with us? How do we self-correct?
I think the first thing is that, like, for example, the intervention that we're seeing. In the majority of the cases, we always see that opposition parties like the DA and other, civic society organizations always say, could the president, really intervene? Africa has this policy, of, sovereignty of states, that you don't really get to intervene, in African issues. And they even went on to say, look, the United Nations must know that they cannot just run into Africa when there's a problem. They must leave this to the AU and, other regional bodies like SADC and ECOWAS. And on this particular light, what we have seen basically is that when we make comparisons with EU and other countries globally, we see that if there are problems with other countries, they get to be really engaged. They say what they think. They get to be very boisterous in condemning what is not right. In Africa, our African leaders, they sit down and have coffee whilst other countries are burning. People are practically dying, and they sit and entertain these people. I mean, like what we saw al-Bashir, who was sent out of the country when he was supposed to be arrested. But we see what is also happening in that country now. And what has happened in Zimbabwe, it started way back in 2004 when there was President Thabo Mbeki, and President Thabo Mbeki actually said, in fact, started in 2000. He said, what crisis? The Zimbabwean people will fix their problems. But how do Zimbabwean people fix their problems when they try to demonstrate something very simple, to demonstrate and say we are not happy, and then they are going to get killed?
Peacefully at that. When you reflect on how the government moved in responding to the protests, how would you grade them?
Look, I think it was barely the first day, then just on the very same day, we had the government, moving in with soldiers at night, helicopters, so Zimbabwe was basically at war. And who was it fighting against? The very same people that, are said to have voted the same government. I mean, if you had, Bulawayo, Harare, Mutare, basically this was the whole country. So even if it's an element of the opposition, I think as a leader, when are we going to see African leaders real standing up and becoming accountable and saying, look, I think there's a problem in my house or in our country. Let me therefore, say maybe I need to step down if there is a problem. Because how do you have everybody that has voted you going to the streets and the response that you give to the people is you want to kill them, to stop them from speaking? So we in Africa, I think we need to say we need servant leadership. We don't want this boss leadership that says it's my word that goes. People vote you in because they think you can do something for them. But what you do in turn is when the people say, no, we are no longer happy. And this is the principle of democracy. This is the principle of constitutionalism. When people vote you in today and they feel that you're not doing good, they have a right to even ask you or to get you to step down tomorrow or any other time before your term is over. But it doesn't look like that right applies to us in Africa.
Is it democracy at play, or is it a military state disguised as a democratic state?
I think that question that you're asking, or that statement is very important, because in Africa in general, I think we need to get to a point where we realize that what we call democracy and constitutionalism almost does not exist. What we have is, we have got in paper constitutions, constitutionalism, but in practice we have got full military states that are pure dictatorships. And that's what we see in Zimbabwe. Remember, Emmerson Mnangagwa, the president of Zimbabwe, was responsible for the killings that took place in Zimbabwe from 1982 to 1987. And just yesterday and the day before yesterday, in Bulawayo again, people were being abducted. Men were being taken out of their houses at night, and people were saying these people have still not come back. And this is the same man that is now coming back, and that's why, it has been said that history always repeats itself. And maybe that's what's happening now in Zimbabwe.
The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. But then we spoke about the lack or the silence from continental bodies. Who then helps the people of Zimbabwe?
Now, the most unfortunate thing is that we've got AU. AU is seen as, the kingmaker in Africa, is seen as the one that, if it has spoken, everyone is going to listen, because we look up to it. We look at the Constitutive Act of the AU, which talks about, peace, democracy, and all that. But AU has always, come up, blowing hot and cold. In Gabon recently, it was blaming, the coup, but in Zimbabwe in 2017 said it wasn't a coup. So we've got AU that is supposed to be a watchdog. But the unfortunate part is, how do you get Mnangagwa, who is part of, the decision-making body in AU, because the AU is led by African heads of states. This is the highest decision-making board in AU. So the Secretary General, the AU Commissioner, what's his name? For Musa, is merely what? He's just a puppet, because whatever that he can say, he does not really make, these decisions. So at the end of the day, we are saying that we want Mr. Mnangagwa to condemn himself. And we want, Kabila, who's just gone out, or, we want, let's say, President Ramaphosa, if he makes a mistake, to blame himself. We want Kagame to blame himself when he's the one that is perpetrating that. And I don't think that is possible.
And that's where we leave it. Thank you very much. Mr. Vusmuzi Sibanda is the chairperson of the Africa Diaspora Forum. We appreciate your time on the program. Do stay with us. More news from the continent in just a moment.